Okay.
Noch nicht ganz.
Gibst du mir einen Thumbs up, wenn wir live sind?
Ja, jetzt.
We
Oh
need to
yeah.
practice our start. Welcome, everybody. Hi, Pascal.
Hi. Let me.
Welcome, everyone, to our second episode of the podcast, Piece of the Puzzle. This podcast is dedicated to the interesting topic of how to get involved in peace work as a young professional. And correct me if I'm wrong, Pascal, but we decided to have this conversation because we both think in hindsight it would have been really interesting to know some
Oh,
of these things before we get
indeed, indeed.
yeah. So we look today at what we think what peace work really entails in this context, and what the educational programs are to become involved, what the skill set is. We look at some of the specific challenges that young professionals face, but also what some of the mentorship structures are and support structures. And of course, as we are live, we look really forward to having your questions. So if you have questions, take this opportunity and put them in the comments, and like the podcast also, so stay tuned for further episodes. Pascal, so in this context of that question, how to get involved, how would you define very broadly sort of peace work?
Wow. Yeah, peace work. What is peace work? I think we could spend hours, probably days and weeks, to define it in all details. But yeah, to put it short, it's in my understanding, it's any type of effort to prevent or manage or resolve. There already we could have a dispute on what's the right term on how to deal with the conflict. Should we manage or resolve or prevent or but I would say in broad terms, everything that helps to overcome conflict situations. And then obviously it can be really broad, is it before a conflict? Is it more linked to development? Is it really during the hot phase of a conflict, maybe armed or physical violence? Is it afterwards, reconstruction, which is a kind of prevention? uh, transitional justice, which comes after violence, or what means sustainable peace, long lasting. You could put in, you can add ecological topics to that. So it's really broad. Then in terms of level, you have grassroots level, maybe even one-on-one, or you work with groups, or up to high level diplomacy, track 1, track 2, track 3, and so on, as it's called. And I was also thinking about another point, which is the where, in which region you do that, because very often people working in development cooperation, we think about some countries far away, which is also true, but you can also do peace work at home. When I'm here in Switzerland, so obviously we don't have violent conflicts, but I can still promote peace here in my country. So it's also a question, what are we talking about? Which type of conflict, which type of violence we are addressing, and where? So it's a broad field. We're not going to answer that question, I think, much more in detail than that, but to structure maybe a bit the intro.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think the where is interesting. I absolutely echo that. And from my experience, there's this tendency that it's always easier to go somewhere else to work on conflict. And that many organizations have the tendency to do that. And I remember even trying to promote more dialogue projects within Europe when I worked for the EU. But of course, that is a lot less interesting. But as we look now, I think into some of the divisions that we face, within EU countries, or also Switzerland, right? Like sort of the social cohesion, there is definitely a need to build communities and to overcome gaps. I mean, not even mentioning the US. So I think definitely, but this is, again, another topic, which maybe we could also add another episode of the podcast, because it's really interesting to look at that aspect as well. This challenge of why do we always go somewhere else to resolve conflict rather than working from home at home.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We can maybe look at some of the educational programs that exist.
Hmm.
And I maybe just start what I find interesting when looking at this is that there isn't a lot of there aren't a lot of specific programs on peace mediation as such, or peace building work. So I think there are programs that look at conflict and peace. So you have these conflict and peace studies programs, or you have programs that study that look at international relations, which is of course partially connected to this as well. But to look specifically into peace building work or peace mediation, it's quite rare. And
Yeah.
maybe this is why it's also interesting to mention the one university that really has a dedicated program to that in English as well, for our English speaking colleagues listening, is the ETH in Zurich, which has a specific program on a master in peace mediation.
Exactly.
And yeah, and also I think the European University, the European Viadrina University has a program, specifically a master's program for mediation, but I think it is in German only.
Hmm.
I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, Pascal.
Yeah, no, I think it's true. It's in German, or at least mainly. Yeah, that's right. So there are few really study programs in peace mediation, even in mediation in general. I think there are no few study programs, and mediation is usually thought as a continuous education. So there are more programs extra university. You have a couple of NGOs that offer peace mediation trainings outside the university programs. But yeah, you mentioned the two main ones. For me, that's also the only ones I know: the ETH in Zurich and Viadrina University. Uh, yeah, and then there are other programs more related to peace building, or yeah, you mentioned international relations or peace research or reconciliation. So they all have a certain focus, which I think is important to be aware of as a potential student, because depending on which program you choose, they have a certain approach or philosophy, and then obviously you get into that philosophy, and you will be shaped by that philosophy, which is normal if you go to a study program. So you might have a study program called peace, but you have maybe more security mindset behind, or more international relations mindset, or yeah, no, I did the program in the distance university in Hagen. It doesn't exist anymore, which I don't know how it was called. I think it was called peace studies simply, and yeah, it was more, we could say, maybe critical peace studies. Um, so it depends where you study, and then that will shape your philosophy, at least partly, and also the ways that you find later on.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned this. That is absolutely true. I think it's also good to see. So I found, for instance, I didn't realize that the Queen's University in Belfast has a really good program on
Yeah.
conflict resolution and peace building. And I think if you study it in a context where violent conflict has really shaped generations, that is very, very interesting. So I think the choice is really yeah, you have to take it carefully. And I also think I just want to quickly pick up on what you mentioned in terms of a continuous learning process. I would absolutely endorse that, because for me, it was as a second, I went back to mediation in a second step. So I have a law background, and when I studied law, I always enjoyed the part on alternative dispute resolution the most. And so like 10 years later, I decided, okay, I really want to go into this, and then decided to do a continuous 1.5 year long program, which you know very well, Pascal, which was affiliated with the University of Basel, which also doesn't exist anymore, I think. But it was, in particular, it was really this. It was developed in a way to accompany work, and also, I think, as it is a continuous longer process, you learn differently. And I think in any kind of program, what is so interesting is also that you have some practical work in a way with it, because I also find you personally have to work through your own
Absolutely.
ways of resolving conflict, right?
Yeah, it's I would say a mediation, practical mediation training program is a transformational process. It's and that's why, by the way, the Swiss Federation for Mediation, the FSM, that's at least what I understood, is that there is the condition that programs have to last over 18 months. Although you can do it in, I don't know how many days it is. It's, I think, 200 hours. So you can, theoretically, you could do it in 2 months. But the condition is to have it over 18 months, because you have time, your life evolves, you have experiences in your life during that, and you make connections with what you learned in the training in the different modules. And yeah, for me, it was a personal development as well, much more than just theory.
Definitely, definitely. Just quickly, Pascal, as you see our YouTube channel, do we have any questions? Anybody?
No, I'm observing, not
Okay,
so
okay,
far,
no,
no.
no questions. All right, okay. Do you want to add anything else on the specific programs, or do you want to go a little bit more? Shall we go into the skills that are needed?
Just for the program, so we produced a list that we have on our LinkedIn page. So you can go on our LinkedIn page. It's called Piece of the Puzzle. I think it should be probably easy to find. I put the link once we finish the live in the description of this video. And then, yeah, please like our page. That would support us. Little effort to support us, and we will publish some articles there over time, and maybe later on a newsletter. We will see how it evolves. But we have already published now this list of different programs, mainly bachelor, and also I think also one or two. Sorry, mainly master, but one or two bachelor programs as well. Yeah, so if you're interested in knowing more, the links are there as well, so you can easily then check out the programs more in detail.
That's great. Yes, I forgot to mention the
And
list.
and maybe also about you, but I think we come to this now. It's also that I think to work in peace, in the peace field, or in the more concretely in the peace mediation field, yeah, I'm not so sure now. It's slowly coming with those master programs we mentioned before, but I'm not sure if there's a straight line. You have to study exactly this or that. Many people go into this field a bit later in the career. It's not, I mean, I don't think that many people would go to a specific bachelor, specific master program, and then start working as a peace mediator. I don't,
Mm.
I don't see that in the field.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think we're gonna talk about that for sure. I also think there's an increasing need for people, in German I would say Quereinsteiger,
Yeah.
somebody who comes from another with another background from another area of work, and which can be very, very, very different. For instance, with an increasing focus on climate change and conflict.
Mm.
Climate scientists, for instance, or
Yeah.
engineers who work on water resources, etc. So I think there's all this specific knowledge that in the meantime really comes into mediation processes that is needed. And so definitely I would underline that too, that no matter what kind of background a person has, it's really, you can always come in and start working on peace, because it is also such a broad concept in any case.
Yeah.
But talking about the skill sets and attitudes, what are in your mind some of the things people have to bring in as well? I mean, you obviously learn some of them, but then I think you have to really also have a certain skill set and attitude in particular to
Yeah.
work in the field of peace.
Yeah, I think there could be also an episode and at least a good discussion on if they are natural born mediators or not.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think to some extent, maybe yes. I think you always can learn. You can learn, of course, the principles, the tools, the process, and so on, the technical things. And you can obviously have personal development, evolve as a person. But I think it comes very much with experience. Um, because in situations where you're exposed to mediation and conflicting parties, and high stress, high risks. Thinking it's a high level of stress resistance, and maybe at least as a young graduate, you maybe don't know if you have that stress resistance. Well, you had exams and so on. It's another type of stress, but if you deal with people and have people around the table, suddenly they start shouting or things like this, then it's another type of stress. And I think it's important to how do you call this, to keep your head clean. In a sense, what I figured out. It's really important not to get into stress and to keep that you keep calm, and because then if you start thinking about, okay, what did I do wrong? Why is that party unhappy? Why? What should I ask? What should I do as next? What should be the next question? And then you get storm in your head, and that's not a good thing. So I think that's an extremely important skill. That's something that you learn by doing. If you have it or not, or if you can develop it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's interesting because it connects to our last episode where we really talked about the importance of emotional intelligence as well. Because sort of this being able to work with stress also means that you understand the trigger of stress and understand how you react to stress and how you can mitigate it actually. So this is really a good point. Yeah, I can definitely see that. I had moments sitting in a mediation where it was really tough to not get very stressed out about about the screaming and definitely. And I think what maybe just worthwhile to mention here around the skills as well is that there's a big difference, I think, in terms of the skill set that we need, whether you look at like very active involvement in dialogue or mediation processes or broader piecework, or whether you are like more on a project development level where you are, for example, advising someone on peace process work. Because if you do the second part, if you're more involved in sort of the background, you definitely also need strong skills around project management. I guess it's still also good to know that when you're sort of in the field on a very grassroots level. But I just sort of in hindsight, looking at some of the roles that I thought would be very hands-on, it meant rather being in an advising role or in a writing role, developing a process for a dialogue going on and then managing it to some extent. So that's a different skill set, right?
That remembers me. I did a negotiation training with the Swiss Foreign Ministry, and so at some point the trainer he said he was more referring to negotiation, but obviously there's a thin line between mediation and negotiation. He said as a negotiator you have to be like water. You have to go where you can flow. And I like that a lot. And I figured out later on, I was searching for this. Apparently, Bruce Lee said the same thing. I don't know in which context. Be like water. So there seems to be some.
Who stole it from who?
I don't know. But it applies to both, so that's a good sign.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
It's another point to,
And another point, tolerance of ambiguity is a principle. I think it's important for mediation, because sometimes you have two opposing, confronting realities, but both are true, and you have to try to bring it, to compatibility. And obviously, it goes with neutrality, so you cannot be more in favor or feel more close to one or the other. You should, as far, I mean, neutrality is not something I think we can 100% ensure at all moment. But it's an important point to know that sometimes you have various realities at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting, I think some of the skill sets and attitudes that we talked about are not the ones that you learn in a university program necessarily. I mean, you may understand sort of the academic or the scientific background of it, but you definitely, as you mentioned, have to practice it actually to be able to adopt them and really implement it, apply it in your daily work. I think there's other skill sets as well. I find increasingly that we really have to be aware of gender dynamics, and wherever we look, this is really important to understand that and to also integrate it into sort of the conflict analysis that we do. But I think it's very much common sense, hopefully, in the
Yeah,
meantime.
yeah.
Do you?
And it's more than just quota for men and women, no? Gender sensitivity is much more.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Yeah.
We have a question. Isabel, I think she was here already last time. So she says, could you please speak more about the differences between negotiation and mediation? So it's not exactly the topic today, but I think we can say a few words about this.
Yeah, go for it.
Shall I go for it?
Mhm.
Yeah, well, uh, in in mediation, you also negotiate. I think but in negotiation, you maybe don't mediate. Maybe that's one first approach to answer the question. Um, I mean, the simple definition is that in negotiation, you have two parties without a third neutral party. So that's probably the most simple definition. And in mediation, you have two parties and you have a third party, which is a neutral party, supporting those two parties in talking. And in negotiation, it's like two parties together alone. Um, Other than that, yeah, again, without going very much into all details, but maybe negotiation is more output oriented. Mediation is maybe also more relation oriented, more transformative, depending on the approach that you use. Yeah, what would you say? What would you add to that?
Definitely would agree to that. I think the last point is important that it is not necessarily as transformational, more transactional, and that
Right.
when we say a negotiator, it's in general a negotiator is negotiating for one side
Hmm.
and not the impartial third party that a mediator would be. But
Yeah.
then I think what the problem is, it's not a problem, but I think we need to be aware that it's sort of on an international level, the definitions are they're replaced frequently.
Mm.
So you would say it's a peace negotiation, but it's with a mediator. So it's a bit, it also depends, and I think we talked about this last time, what the parties want to name it for
Mm.
various reasons.
Yeah.
So it doesn't necessarily mean that when we say, or when you read negotiation, that it is, a negotiation in a narrow
Yeah.
sense that we just defined.
Mm. And you can have strongly mediation mindset approaches in negotiation. If you look at the Harvard negotiation approach, where the
Yes.
idea is how can
Mm,
I fulfill your needs and you can fulfill my needs. I mean,
mm, mm.
this is what you do in mediation.
Okay. All right. Shall we briefly look maybe into the topic of pathways into the
Yeah.
field? So we
Yeah.
looked at the educational programs that exist, the skill sets one should bring, and then one other topic we thought would be interesting to explore a bit are the pathways. Pascal, do you want to talk about your own experience, your pathway into
Yeah.
the
So
world of peace building and mediation?
yeah. Well, I guess I'm one of those Quereinsteiger you mentioned before who did something different before. Well, I mean, I'm a trained engineer.
Hmm, I didn't know
And
that. Still learning things about you. That's
yeah,
cool.
yeah. No, I'm well, my first education is engineering. And already during my studies, I knew that I want to go abroad. I want to do some development work. Whereas I didn't know anything about it. I just knew I found it cool. You know, you saw on TV, you see the guys from Red Cross, and I found that that's what I want to do. You are abroad and, you know, you do something useful and so on. And so I think my reflection pathway was first humanitarian work. That's what, at least in my time, that's what I saw most. That was the visible part to me. And then I figured out, oh, but there is not only humanitarian work, there's also development work, which is more, let's say, long lasting. And then I found out there is also peace work, which is again something a bit different. And I did then the master program I mentioned before, the peace studies master program. And before that, you know, I remember very well when I was running around all those events in Switzerland where you have expositions. We have an institution called Sinfo in Bienne. This is an NGO how to put this, they create synergies for people working in NGOs. They do the training programs, and they have a job database and so on. And they organize an annual fair, and then there's the JPO presentation program, the junior professional program. There is, various things like this. And I was going to all these events, trying to see what can I do, where can I find an entry point. Because first I thought, it will be easy because I had 3 languages, I had a university degree. I thought it will be easy to get in development work. They will, be happy to welcome me. And very quickly I found out, no, that's not the case. It's quite competitive environment, and you have to have experience abroad in best case, and so I did for, I don't know, during the end of my studies, I think for 1 year, I went to these events and I saw different people I met the same people at different events, and some drop out over time because they found a job and changed their mind and so on. And then I had, was a few months, 3 months, kind of consulting mandate with, it was called the Study on Violence Against Children, which was led by the UNICEF together with 2 other UN organizations. I don't remember now which ones, where I did some research work, regarding violence against children, and focused on the Middle East and North Africa. That was the area where I was interested in. And then I could go. I found an opportunity with economic cooperation with SECO. SECO is the Swiss State Secretariat for Economic Affairs, and I went to Morocco to do really. I went there to work on the communication for a small engineering company. Well, it was not a company; it was a PPP, public-private partnership, and they consulted the Moroccan industry to become more environmental friendly. But I wanted to go into peace work, so when I come back, I had the opportunity and I could enter DCAF in Geneva, where we met, and they hired me. I think, I'm quite sure, just for my country experience. I did not have any experience or competencies because DCAF is security sector governance. I had absolutely no experience in that, but I had the country experience, and I think that's how I got in.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's.
I think that's an important point to mention. It's this very practical country experience. I think it was similar for me. I had a more traditional pathway in a way, because I studied law and then did a master in criminology and international law. So it was more like a direct way, and then started to work for the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly in their fellowship, which is, by the way, one of the, I think, the things, the suggestions we have to look at for young professionals. But I think what was missing, and what I then acquired still for the OSCE, was the work in a country, and it was post-conflict. I started to work in Kosovo with the police in particular on human rights. So it was not specifically mediation or dialogue related, but it was peace building in a sense. But I feel if I was to advise someone on what is needed, because I think there's this challenge also in terms of you have a relevant education, but then your first step, this entry into the world, into the working world, is really, really tough. Because I remember also, and I think this hasn't changed, that you look at the sort of the job offers, and they always require these 1 to 2 years very practical work experience. But where do you get it if nobody takes you on board? And I think this is right. This is why this importance of what you also mentioned, even if it's a short time that you get something, you work for 1 or 2 months. And I think this idea of, as we said, developing your skill set in practice, and you can do this with voluntary work as well. And we get to that. We wanted to talk about that in any case, right? What are some of the voluntary things one can do to get involved? And it can be, a neighborhood community center, or it can be in the context of my mediation program. It was really becoming involved in this association of neighborhood mediation, where I could assist and then at a later stage take on mediations myself. So
Mm.
I think the more spaces one finds to become involved actively on any kind of level, the better it is, because it will serve you later. Than to really claim this also as experience.
Yeah.
Is this similar from what you think? Do you have the same?
Yeah. Well, yeah, for me that was the case. So I had this 3 months experience, then the Morocco, and yeah, I think you have to, yeah, accumulate experiences, and for sure there are people that have maybe a more straight track. You know, if you, I don't know, you study something and then you get immediately a good job somewhere, I guess that must exist. Or let's, but then yeah, or you have this JPO possibilities where you go as a young graduate. I also remember now, since we're discussing, I remember that I've also tried diplomatic service.
Yeah.
At least I made a candidacy, but it wasn't. I think I wasn't at level. And also, it's, yeah, competencies, but also I mean, profile is also important for some positions. You know, it depends in Switzerland which language area you're from. It's not an exclusive, obviously, condition, but some areas it's easier. So I remember actually when I, no, sorry, this was the SDC. I made a, that was with SDC, JPO for SDC,
Development, the Swiss Development Corporation, right?
Development Agency. Yeah. And I remember when I was in Morocco, and I have a friend working also in development corporation, and his wife, she was with SDC, I think. So I consulted them to say how should I put my papers and so on. And when I sent them my recommendation letter, they say, "Well, why did you write in French? I'm a Swiss German originally, although I was already living the French speaking part, but only for 2 or 3 years." They said, why do you write in French? I said, well, because there's a higher quota for French speaking people, but my French was not good, so the letter was not good.
Mhm.
So those are small stories we learned from all that, right?
Definitely. But I think in the meantime, what's interesting compared to when I started, I think, to work, is that I feel there's a stronger focus on young professionals. So you mentioned there's the JPO programs that is
Mm.
like where you are supported by your national governments to get into different UN agencies. Then the EU
Yeah.
has something similar, which is the Blue Book training program,
Mhm.
specifically targeting young graduates. The OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, has their own young professional program. The program that I mentioned is the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly Fellowship, Research Fellowship, which was a paid research fellowship, which for me was really the entrance into the OSCE as an organization.
Yeah.
So I think there has been progress. And maybe if I could just add this here, but
I-
I also find that compared to 10, 20 years ago, there's a focus on young youth and security and
mm.
peace. And that is also a rather recent development. So within the whole women, peace and security work and agenda and policy work around that, there's also a focus specifically on youth and how to empower youth, young people to become
Mhm.
involved in peace
Mm.
work, because there's a recognition that there's a generational gap in a way. And that is also, that has changed as well, of course, over the years.
There's another point I forgot to mention. There's also in Switzerland, we have an office in the Foreign Ministry who supports Swiss candidates for specific jobs. Not for all the jobs, but if you have an either UN or, I don't know, international organizations at a certain level, they try to support your candidacy. So that's also something, maybe if in other countries they have some similar offices.
Yeah, yeah, they do. I know the Germans do that as well, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
But I think this is sort of one important aspect. What are sort of the support programs? But then I think another level is then the ongoing mentoring and support that is needed. I think early on in a career, in particular, but also throughout. To really make sure that you advance in a way that makes sense and that is impactful.
Mhm.
So Did you have any specific mentoring? Did you get any mentoring or support in a way that you felt was really helpful through your like early years in your career?
I don't think so. I had plenty of people who supported me a little bit, but not like for years or long lasting, maybe short moments. I remember when I was after my engagement in Morocco, I went for a couple of months to UN in Vienna as a consultant. And I think this was also thanks to the network I could establish because the center where I was in Morocco was part of a UN network.
Mhm.
Uh, and then when I was in Vienna, I had a colleague who was actually who wanted to support me and did also support me. And at some point, the question was, do what I want to do? Do I stay and or do something else and go back to Switzerland? And so at that moment, with family, it was for me more to go back, and that's why I went to Geneva to DCAF. But there was the moment also where I could have maybe stayed at UN.
Mhm.
And that person supported me and would have supported me, I think, for another position. Yeah, but was not the right
Yeah.
moment for me. But not so much. But that's something I would really recommend to people, young people listen to us. I think you should really approach people, maybe, I don't know, go to conferences or try to sympathize with experts or people with different positions and ask. I think you should not hesitate to ask for support.
Hmm.
I mean, not stupidly, of course, but with some elegance and, diplomacy. But that's something I never really did. I think it's not part of my, nature. I think I'm not, which is a weak point. I think I should have much more asked things that I want. But I would recommend do it. I mean, the worst thing you can get is a no, and
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I think, I mean, I want to add that point that for women in particular, I think it's really very, very useful. And there are specific networks and mentorship programs that are really there from women to support women. And I've started that very late in my career. I'm now a member of the German Women Mediators Network. And it's a great, great platform to on I think on a thematic level to exchange with other experts, but then also on a more personal level to support each other when it's needed.
mhm,
So I definitely recommend that as well. And I've actually in preparation for this episode, I went back to think about a bit what is out there. And there's, for instance, the Women in International Security, WIIS. I don't know whether you don't say WISE, I think. WIIS.
yeah,
And you can become a member. It's a yearly membership fee, which is very limited, but it has country chapters, but you're also
mhm,
able to connect with all country chapters and with women from around the world working on, it's called security, but it's the human security definition.
mhm.
So it's also a very broad concept and definitely includes peace work. And the other one is the Women in International Affairs. So I think Women in International Affairs had a specific LinkedIn page, and they do on a monthly basis actually circulate fellowships that come
Oh,
up. So it's a really interesting resource. I think also this being on LinkedIn and seeing, who are the people and the organizations and the platforms to follow that regularly post upcoming, fellowships or other programs, that's really useful.
there's also the Rotary Peace
Yes.
Fellowship. I really often heard about this. I don't know much what is behind, but it looks really professional, really really good program.
Yes. Yeah.
It's called Peace Fellowship, I think, from Rotary. Yeah, a couple of programs like this.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's Rotary is really one of the very known ones and has an extremely professional and good reputation. So
Yeah.
definitely, I also have colleagues who have started their career with it, and it's a sort of
Oh,
a lifelong support system in a way, which is really great.
Hmm. Hmm.
All right, but
What
sorry.
what about networks beyond mentorship? Networks that people can join and be informed, participate to events, and so on. There are a couple as well. I think we have in our list Mediators Beyond Borders, which is a
Global
good
one,
model.
right? Which is a
Global.
great global network to be connected. Yeah. And then definitely, again, for women, you have several specific women mediators networks. And then I think also like in country, like specifically around mediation, you have in Germany, for instance, also an association which is specifically for mediators.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you have the
So
same in Finland, I guess.
yeah, we have the FSM, Federation Swiss Mediation.
Which is, I think, limited, right? Because it's really for the work that we do in our countries, but not for sort of the international levels. But there's both,
Yeah.
which is great. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's an important point, and I think it's um, I think there's quite a gap between those national mediation federations and the peace mediation work because it's really different fields, I have the impression. In terms of skills, if you are more local oriented mediator, you learn the skills which are very useful for the peace mediation, but the networks are not the same. So this for the skills it's useful, for the networks not really, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
I
uh,
would absolutely agree.
mm,
Absolutely agree.
mm,
But this is why I think like organizations like Mediators Beyond Borders is a really good one to be part of.
yeah.
Yeah. There's
Uh,
also, I found this maybe just briefly, there's specifically for young professionals, the United Network
mhm.
of
Yeah, right.
young peace builders, but it is, you have to be part of a local peace building organization, I think, because it's a network of organizations. I don't think you could become a member as an individual.
Mhm.
But this seems also like a
Yeah,
great platform where you are part of a local structure and you connect
yeah,
on an international level, which
yeah,
seems to be like a really, the best setup in a way.
yeah. There's also another one called Frontline Negotiations or Frontline Negotiators, which is, I think it's driven by HD Center, if I got it right. They have an online platform and it's very much focused humanitarian negotiations. It's very specific, but it looks also very, very interesting. We have another question from Isabel.
And maybe just, I'm just looking at
Please, please.
the watch as well, Pascal, if you want to
Yeah,
briefly talk about the just the challenges,
yeah,
we should do that soon.
yeah. The challenges.
No, but Isabel has a question, so I didn't mean to cut off Isabel's question.
I was hesitating now what to do. Yeah, what does he say? So, do you feel that a master's degree is necessary to continue growth in this field for expanded job opportunities or to increase one's standing?
I think that's hard to answer as a per se answer. I think it very much depends on the individual background and work experience of the person. And again, I think the academic education is one aspect, but in hindsight, to me, the more practical work and with not necessarily only an academic program is really useful. So it depends. If a master's program does include also quite practical
Mm.
aspects, which some may do, it could be very useful. But I think as a standalone or just as a per se answer saying like yes, absolutely, I'm not 100% sure. I think it would really depend. I don't know.
So, if you,
That wasn't a very clear answer, but
if let's say you have been accepted to a, let's say, very famous elite peace study program that you can enter, and at the same time you get an interesting job offer, what do you choose?
you're asking me. I would go for the job offer.
Me too.
Okay. That answers the question, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
I think
Challenges.
just to say
Please.
just one sentence to that, Isabel. I think the beauty of this is that you do find programs that accompany work. Just to say, it's a lot then to juggle that, but I think that is the best setup that you do something like during a longer period and not as intense as a full-time university program, but something that accompanies your
Mhm.
work actually in a way. Yeah.
Mhm. All right, the challenges. Yeah, we have already mentioned a couple of challenges, like that you have to do a lot of experience and volunteering and things before you recognize to get into some more substantial job. What else would you say? What could be barriers, challenges?
Yeah, I think there is definitely something that has to do with age and with the generational gap,
Mm,
right? That just because you're younger and you have started to work in a certain area, you lack credibility in a way, and hence you get less recognition and you're less involved. So I think that is definitely that remains really a challenge that needs to be addressed.
mhm, mm,
Sure. And I also think that in particular right now with the funding crisis, that
yeah,
again, also for younger professionals and also maybe organizations that are younger, right? So you have maybe a group of activists that have formed an organization, but it's harder for a more recently established
yeah,
organizations to obtain funding.
yeah.
Yeah,
Currently, funding is cut everywhere, huh? Starting
yeah,
with the US, but also other
yeah.
European countries. What else? We could say, yes, stressy situations. We mentioned this, psychological or emotional burnout, depending on the situation you get in. You might, experience, I mean, not experience, well, maybe in worst case, but also, see or be exposed to violence.
Yeah.
Um,
Definitely. And I think again, also you mentioned the stress. I think when you're younger, and at the beginning of your career, you may have also not yet developed the coping mechanisms that you need. So I think any sort of emotional burnout and psychological stress is even stronger when you're a younger professional, I think. So that is definitely, it's a risk for everybody, I think, involved
mm,
in this work for sure, in particular those who really work on the front lines. But I guess when you're younger and you have just started and there's also not a support system in place, you're definitely more likely, I think, to suffer from burnout and also, yeah,
and
PSP.
and in addition to this, maybe some kind of deception after couple of years. At least that was my case. I mean, as a young, naive person, I was sure and convinced that world peace will come and during my lifetime, and that I will maybe contribute a little part to it. And today I see it's not the case. It didn't come, not yet. But yeah, I don't know. That's a big debate. Are we getting closer to world peace or not? But I expected it to be quicker. So
Yeah,
you
that's a
might
good
have
point.
to deal with that. Or maybe you're in specific missions where suddenly things turn out worse. Maybe you have to leave the country and violence breaks out, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah. I think one point is also, and that I find has really changed in the past years, is the sort of the role social media plays, and
Mm,
that is a challenge as well, in
mm,
particular in peace building. The amount of misinformation that is on social media is overwhelming. And I think while it is also an absolute advantage to be very connected and very aware of everything that's going on in the
mm,
online
mm,
world, I think, of course, younger people are more tuned into that. It also really leads to challenges, I think, and to security risks to some extent, right? To be
mm.
quite, when you're quite visible online, you're also vulnerable in a way. So I think that's definitely one other aspect that has also changed from when you and I started, Pascal. Not
Absolutely,
old, but
absolutely.
yeah.
Although the information and misinformation was already a topic a long time ago, if you think about the war in Rwanda and the contribution or the role of the radio programs, I mean, today it's just completely another level now.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Good. Yeah, maybe to sum it up, what would you say? I don't know, what are next steps? What should, well, I think we mentioned it. Try to enter programs, try to network, try to, you know, find a mentor, ask people for support. How would you sum up this session?
Yeah, I think there's not much to add to that, right? I think it's this. I think one important point to remember is also there is no late entry. There is,
Hmm.
if there's an interest, I think, to become involved in peace work or in mediation in particular, there are ways for sure.
Yeah.
And I think the you mentioned this, right? That the importance of finding early on a support network, and you mentioned that. For me, that's an important point: is being not too proud and embarrassed. Asking for help and support is
Hmm.
really a really good point to remember too, I think.
Absolutely. And there are even specific approaches. I remember I had a discussion with somebody from HR from ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross. And I think most of their new employers, they have the delegates, which is like the most visible position where you go and negotiate and distribute food and so on. And they have most of, as if I remember right, I hope so, but like most of the new recruitees are either young people or people like around 50 or more, because then, kids are grown up and, they have time again to go, not only time, but they can go abroad. Because if you have the years of, you have family, for instance, you cannot do that in many cases. So that's, I kept that in mind, a small part of my brain. Maybe go, maybe try that.
We can do an episode on sort of the older generation starting, but I agree, because this is when you have gathered so much experience,
Yeah,
I find, and also in terms of being aware of your own triggers and how you behave in stressful situations, etc. Much more. I mean, I'm speaking for myself. Much more awareness than 20 years ago, for
mm,
sure.
mm.
Okay. All
Good,
right.
perfect. I think we're done. So please, yeah, if you have more questions or comments or remarks on everything we said, please don't hesitate to comment this video. And yeah, join the channel, like the channel also on LinkedIn. That helps us.
Yeah,
And
and also just to say, we are on LinkedIn, both of us, so
mm,
you can always send us a connection request. Really happy to be in touch and to help specifically on this topic. I think it's really relevant. So if
exactly.
there's anything we can be helpful with, don't hesitate to reach out.
Good point. We have a thank you very much from Isabel. Thanks to you,
Okay.
Isabel.